Thank you very much to Howie, Lavine, and Teresa, Gowan. They will be joining us again at the end of our program. And a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us this evening for our first and hopefully our last Zoomsday, a celebration of the day when James Joyce's modernist masterpiece, Ulysses, unfolded in Dublin in 1904, now internationally referred to as Bloomsday in honor of Leopold Bloom, the novel's protagonist. We like to call it the thinking woman's St. Patrick's Day.
I was frozen there for a second, so I'm assuming that I'm probably up now. We're hosting this Zoomsday at a troubled and transformational time in American history. And Joyce, the master scrutinizer of the inner consciousness of man, would surely approve of the current deep and brutally honest examination of racism in this country.
Ulysses has been described as the greatest anti-racist text in the English language, and Joyce's hatred of racism in all its forms is palpable in his book about the Irish Jew who is an outsider in his home country. From lynchings in the United States to the racism of the British against the Irish, to anti-Semitic slurs hurled at Bloom himself, Joyce makes clear in Ulysses his rejection of what he called the old pap of race hatred, and through the kind, tolerant Bloom, his compassion for the other.
In 1845, Frederick Douglass, the great orator and abolitionist, made his way to Ireland, where he spent 4 months traveling the country and educating its population about the horrors of slavery. Douglass wrote about the warm welcome that he received in Ireland, including his meeting with Daniel O'Connell, the great liberator, who became a staunch ally in the fight to end slavery. In a letter written from Belfast, Douglass proclaimed, "Instead of the blue sky of America, I'm covered with the soft grey fog of the Emerald Isle. I breathe, and lo, the chattel becomes a man."
Douglass's visit to Ireland coincided with the beginning of a dark period in Irish history, the potato famine, during which 1 million Irish died and 1 million others emigrated. The famine came about in part because of systemic discrimination and inequality perpetrated by centuries of British rule in Ireland that resulted in the Irish living as second-class citizens in their own country.
As noted in Noel Ignatiev's book, How the Irish Became White, the Irish came to the US as an oppressed race, yet quickly developed the misguided belief, a belief frequently driven by the will to survive, that to succeed, they needed to oppress their closest social class competitors, the African-American population.
In 1843, Daniel O'Connell wrote, "Over the broad Atlantic, I pour forth my voice, saying, 'Come out of such a land, you Irishmen,' or if you remain and dare countenance the system of slavery that is supported there, we will recognize you as Irishmen no longer." As the Irish progressed in the United States and played prominent roles in the labor movement, they mostly excluded their Black working class brethren from participation. Rather than forming an alliance with their fellow oppressed co-workers, the Irish sometimes chose to collaborate in the mistreatment of another race in order to secure their own leg up in white America.
As Irish in America and as Irish Americans, we need to regain our greenness. Remember our history of being oppressed and our oppression of others, and rededicate ourselves to standing alongside the African-American community in its struggle for equality in all facets of society, among others, equality in housing, equality in education, and equal treatment in the criminal justice system. We'll now hear from IABANY Director Shelley Quilty-Lake regarding Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative, the organization to which we're dedicating our event tonight.
Thank you very much, Janet. And thank you everyone for being here for our Bloomsday event. As the Bar Association, as Janet has touched upon, IABANY is committed to standing up against racism and engaging in meaningful actions to support the fight for greater justice, equality, and fairness. In planning this event, we wanted to ensure that it was in support of a social justice organisation. The Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, is the perfect fit in that regard. Brian Stevenson, an inspirational attorney and author of Just Mercy, founded the EJI. Thanks to all of you so far who have donated for the organisation for this event. Your contribution is critical to EJI's efforts to end mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, to challenge racial and economic injustice, and to protect the most basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in American society. For those of you who have not yet donated, I ask that you do so. To all of us, I ask that we continue to support the vital work that EJI does. The following video you are about to see is about the work that EJI does in assisting individuals on death row, as well as the EJI's Legacy Museum and National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Roll the tape.
Late 80s, the Equal Justice Initiative was created as an organization to help people on death row. Over time, being exposed to a lot of other injustices in the criminal justice system led us to branch out and try to create programs and initiatives to confront the other problems outside of the death penalty context.
Imposing the sentence of life imprisonment without parole isn't a life sentence, it's a death sentence, it's a death in prison sentence. We've done a lot of work for people who've been sentenced to die in prison, people whose convictions and sentences have not been reliably imposed.
I was convicted in 2000 for drug trafficking, which was a crime that I didn't commit. They sentenced me life without parole. I got in touch with EJI. They said, we're going to work for you and we're going to get you out of here. And I cried. I just cried because it was just overwhelming to know that somebody was actually there to help me. August the 17th of 2006, I was released, and it just was so surreal. It was just so surreal.
In Montgomery, we are calling for truth and the courage to face our history in a new way.
In Montgomery, we have opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a space to honor thousands of African American victims of racial terror lynching. In Montgomery, we have opened the Legacy Museum, a space that documents the need for reflection and justice from enslavement to mass incarceration.
In Montgomery, we are asking you to join us, visit us, stand with us, hope with us, hope for more understanding, more justice, more fairness, more determination to overcome our history, hope for an end to racial bias and inequality, hope for a better future.
In Montgomery, Alabama, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum, from enslavement to mass incarceration.
And I just want to echo again what JaneAnne said. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to EJI and their cause, and we really appreciate that. I also want to thank the Irish Consulate for its unwavering support of IABANY over the years, and in particular with regard to its support for tonight's event. And joining us for some welcoming remarks is the Consul General himself, Kieran Madden.
Thanks, Janet, and thank you, JaneAnne and Shelley Ann and Michael and all at IABANY for inviting me along to say a few words. If I could just pick up on the introduction in the first place. Over the last 18 months or so, the Consulate has been trying to do new work in terms of outreach to Black Irish Americans and African Americans generally. So, you highlighted, I suppose, the dichotomy between Frederick Douglass's experience of the Irish in Ireland and of the Irish when they came to America. And there was quick quotes from Timothy Egan's book that highlighted, in Ireland, of the time in Ireland, he wrote, "One of the most pleasing features of my visit thus far has been the total absence of all manifestations of prejudice against me on account of my colour. But 10 years later, he wrote, perhaps no class of our fellow citizens has carried this prejudice against colour to a point more extreme and dangerous than have our Catholic Irish fellow citizens. So there was a dichotomy in all of this. But equally, he says that the Irish were taught, when they step upon our soul, to hate and despise the Negro. There was socioeconomic that doesn't make it, I suppose, any more forgivable, certainly looking back. But I'd say over the last 18 months, we've been trying to explore the links and explore the history and explore the good and the bad in it. The estimates vary that there are between 30 and 38% of African Americans have Irish heritage. And we know some of that comes from very dark places, through slavery and rape, but a lot of it doesn't either. It was just the bottom social rungs of the ladder, social ladder, intermarrying. Down the 8th ward, there's long records of Irish African American intermarriage down there. But then the roads diverged, and when I came here, every event we attend or host or speak at for the consulate, almost every event, it's just white faces only, which isn't New York, and it's not the United States. And importantly, it no longer is Ireland also. So we're trying to turn around that, and we're working with NYU on collecting oral histories of non-white Irish Americans. Just before the lockdown, I was honoured to host the launch of the new African American Irish Diaspora Network. And if any of you in IABANY have ideas to take forward this work with us in other ways, we'd love to do so. We need to find new ways of doing it. Culture is the obvious one. The history of the banjo coming from West Africa to Appalachia to become an integrated part of traditional Irish music is one of the stories. But there's so much rich history there. And some people have been working away at this for many years, the likes of Dr. Lenwood Sloan and Mick Maloney. But I think it's important that we lend official weight to that work also. And history isn't just a dark history. I mean, there's darkness in it, but it's not just a dark history. It's not enough that we say, no, we're not racist. Given the history, we have to get out there and show it and build the links, and there is responsibility upon us. And I guess that brings us back to Ulysses and the tolerance of Leopold Bloom as a character in the novel, and the tolerance and openness of that is displayed in the book. I mean, the book very clearly rejects any kind of xenophobia or overwrought nationalism, and of course anti-Semitism. I mean, you'd think that it was set in 1904 and published in 1922. You know, it was maybe going places that a lot of others weren't going at that time, and it was a good jumping off point for some of this work. Taking its publication date, we're about a year and a half away, I suppose, from about 19 months away from the centenary of its publication. And we're looking forward to celebrating that. It was published on the 2nd of February 1922. All the chapters of course, have been published a few years earlier in New York. And there'll be huge celebrations. So hopefully the fact that this celebration has to be by remote over Zoom will be well in our rearview mirror by then. The world will have righted itself, and there'll be big celebrations, big exhibitions, both on this side of the Atlantic and of course in Ireland, and I expect also in Paris and many other places around the world. I look forward to that. And lastly, I just want to say I'm really looking forward to hearing Frank McNally speak. I've never met the man, I've never spoken to the man, but I've read him for years in the Irish Times. And one of his very visible skills is to take a well-told story or a well-trodden path and come at it from a whole new angle that none of us had ever thought of or would have thought of without his input or his humour. So I look forward to hearing Frank McNally, and thank you for including me in your celebration of Ulysses here today. Sorry, and IABANY also, I should say, does the same thing with its work year in, year out, built up around Bloomsday. There are countless readings of Ulysses happening in this country and across the globe right now, or over this 24 hours. But IABANY always finds a way to bring it back to legal work and rights. So thank you for that work also. Thanks, Janet and JaneAnne.
Thanks a lot, Ciaran, and thanks for those words. And I think as an organisation, we really appreciate the work that the consulate is doing, as you described, and we firmly support that work and would like to collaborate and continue with working with the consulate in doing something meaningful in that regard. So as Ciaran mentioned, we are delighted to have as our keynote speaker tonight, journalist, author, and Joyce enthusiast, Frank McNally. A former civil servant, he changed careers in the 1990s, joining the Irish Times as chief colour writer, covering politics, sports and culture, among many other subjects. Since 2006, Frank has been the main writer of the Irishman's Diary. It's one of the oldest features in the newspaper, for which Samuel Beckett once considered contributing material. There were no bylines back then, so we don't know, in fact, if he did. Frank's wonderfully eclectic column appears 4 days weekly, Wednesday through Saturday, in the Irish Times, and has not infrequently addressed Joyce's writings. Frank lives in Dublin with his wife and 3 children, and he's appearing from Joyce's Dublin this evening, despite the late time there, with his wife and 3 children. He has completed Ulysses apparently 3.5 times, which works out to be about 3.5 times more than the rest of us have. Frank was not at all insulted to learn that Buttiegieg was our first choice for speaker. Actually, he more than matches Mayor Pete's love for Joyce and Joyce's intricate and sometimes daunting layers of detail in his works. Frank's presentation picks up on one of those intricacies in Ulysses in his discussion of the Phoenix Park murders. The Phoenix Park murders were a famous and violent event in Irish history, referenced a number of times in Ulysses, and involved the fatal stabbings of the newly appointed Chief Secretary for Ireland and the permanent Undersecretary while they were strolling in Phoenix Park in 1882. This act of violence had long-lasting political consequences in Ireland and was denounced by Charles Stewart Parnell, increasing his reputation as a moderate reformer. But I will let Frank tell the rest of the story. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank McNally.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now, Frank. Yeah.
Sorry about the delay. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Ciaran, for the kind words, and thanks, IABANY, for inviting me to this very unique occasion. As we say, we all hope it's the only time it ever has to be done like this, but it's kind of an honour to be involved in such a special occasion, and it's a special honour to be deputising for Mayor Pete. We followed his campaign for the Democrat nomination with great interest, and it was very exciting. However fleeting it was very exciting to think about the possibility of having a Joycean in the White House, but you never know, it might happen yet. Anyway, among the various mentions of the Phoenix Park murders that haunt Ulysses, most are deliberately vague. Typically, they feature Leopold Bloom misremembering the names and dates, but by contrast, one scene celebrates the surgical precision with which a famous journalist at the time summarized the details. It's the one in the offices of the Freeman's Journal, where editor Miles Crawford, recalling the events of a generation earlier, eulogizes one of the great pressmen of the era, Ignatius Gallagher, and, quote, the smartest piece of journalism ever known. The New York World, the best-selling tabloid in that city then, had cabled Dublin urgently seeking a map of the atrocity, where it took place, where Skin the Goat Fitzharris drove the car, the whole route. This would go on the front page of a special edition, scooping the world's rivals for New York's huge Irish readership. The quick-thinking Gallagher cabled back telling them to fetch a copy from their library of the weekly Freeman St. Patrick's Day edition. Then he referred them to an ad on page 4 for Branson's Coffee. That would be the key for the map makers. B is Parkgate Street. B is Parkgate, he instructed. T is the Viceregal Lodge. C is where the murder took place. F to P is the route Skin the Goat drove the car for an alibi. Inchicore, Roundtown, Windy Arbor, Ranelagh. FABP. Got that? Gave it to them on a hot plate, Miles Crawford said, pushing his straw hat back in admiration of the memory. The whole bloody history. Sad to say, it's not clear whether this famous scoop ever actually happened. The hotshot journalist was real, all right, albeit his name was Fred Gallagher, not Ignatius. And the New York World was real too. It was owned by Joseph Pulitzer of the Prizes fame, and it was a pioneer of yellow press sensationalism, so that the Dublin murder map is just the sort of thing it would have splashed on. But the map couldn't have been made at the time of the murders because most of the details weren't known then. Equally, if Gallagher had pieced the information together himself, and he was known for having great contacts among militant Irish Republicans, the scoop would not have been time sensitive. Maybe the details were leaked later in the run-up to the trials, which began in 1883. But if the map exists anywhere, Joycean detectives don't seem to have found it yet. The murders of the 6th of May 1882, not 81 as both Bloom and Miles Crawford misstate them, made headlines around the world. They were all the more shocking because for one of the victims, Lord Frederick Cavendish, it was his first day in the job as Britain's Chief Secretary in Ireland. Even worse, his appointment was intended as an olive branch from England after the years of his hated predecessor, Buckshot Forster, so called for the method his police often used to break up political demonstrations. The Irish Land War, in which impoverished tenants had fought for better treatment from landlords, many of them absentees, was then nearing an end. The next chapter in Ireland's centuries-long struggle against English domination would be the campaign for Home Rule. Forster had just resigned in protest at the Kilmainham Treaty, under which nationalist leader Charles Stewart Parnell had negotiated his own release from Kilmainham jail. That had been another part of the peace process. And to cap it all, Cavendish was a relative of the British Prime Minister, William Gladstone. He was the beneficiary of some benign nepotism, in fact, having married Gladstone's favourite niece. For all these reasons, and because nobody knew him here yet, the incoming man felt free to walk that day from Dublin Castle to his new home in the park, the Chief Secretary's Lodge. The only thing he was worried about was rain. He brought an umbrella. Unfortunately for him, he was joined en route by the Permanent Undersecretary, Thomas Burke, who had been passing in a carriage and alighted to walk alongside him. An Irishman loyal to the castle and so doubly hated by militant nationalists, Burke had replaced his former boss, Forster, as #1 target of the Invincibles, an extreme Fenian breakaway group whose assassins waited up ahead. They didn't know who Cavendish was, but as he flailed out with his umbrella in Burke's defence, he had to die too. Speaking of surgical details, the fact that the killers used knives, and surgical knives at that, led many at the time to suspect they were foreigners. It wasn't a done thing in Ireland for murder to be so clinical. But the chief investigator, John Mallon, knew better. He gradually arrested the suspects on other charges and with the dark arts of a detective, played them off against each other until somebody cracked. What started off with the death of 2 men claimed 10 lives in the end. 5 were hanged for the crimes, at least some of them becoming folk heroes. Foremost of those was Dan Crowley, Dapper Dan as the press called him, whose good looks and noble demeanour were the subject of much comment. He was not one of the actual killers and might have saved his own neck by naming names, but he vowed he would die, quote, 1,000 deaths before doing that, so he swung for it too. One of the ballads that sprang up afterwards took the form of a lament by his widow, every verse ending with the words, "My husband, Dan Curley, I'll see him no more." It's a plaintive song, but among her lamentations, the widow also takes the time to swear a malediction on James Carey, who had turned Queen's witness to save himself. As the verse puts it, may he be evicted, may his wife be a widow, may his children grow wanderers from Erin's green shore, may the curse of each orphan and widow light on him. Oh, my husband, Dan Curley, I'll see him no more. She had her wish. Carey was to have been a pioneer of what we now call the Witness Protection Programme, and fitted with a new identity, he left Ireland to restart life in Australia. But on the first leg of the trip down to Cape Town, he was identified by another passenger, Patrick O'Donnell, who found a gun and shot him dead. O'Donnell was then in his turn shipped back to London to be hanged. The 10th person to die as a result of the murders, if indirectly, was Richard Piggott, an Irish journalist. He was the man who several years later concocted a letter ostensibly from Parnell expressing support for the assassins, which the Parnell-hating Times of London made the very expensive mistake of printing. In fact, Parnell had been severely embarrassed by the killings and even offered to resign until Gladstone dissuaded him. The letter was a crude forgery, exposed in court. To avoid retribution, Piggott first fled to France, then Spain. Police caught up with him in a Madrid hotel room where, cornered, he shot himself. I'm sure the New York World went big on that too. It has been noted by Joycean scholars that apart from fleeting references to the murders, Phoenix Park is conspicuous by its absence in Ulysses. In a book from which 1904 Dublin could be recreated if necessary, as Joyce supposedly boasted, the largest enclosed city park in Europe is hardly mentioned. By contrast, Finnegan's Wake, Joyce's last and notoriously hardest work, most difficult work, is effectively set in Phoenix Park and saturated with references to it, at least 300 by one count. But then, whereas Ulysses is a book of the day, starting with breakfast in Sandy Cove and ending with Molly Bloom's bedtime soliloquy, Finnegan's Wake is a book of the night, written in a dream language of characters who are either asleep or dead. It's as if Joyce thought of the park as the stuff of dreams and nightmares. And indeed, Miles Crawford's comment about Gallagher giving the whole bloody history is followed immediately by a variant on one of the mantras Joyce uses throughout Ulysses, the one about history being a nightmare from which we are trying to awake. Joyce wasn't the only one. Joyce wasn't alone in having such nightmares. A few years before the murders, residents of the park included a very young Winston Churchill, whose grandfather was the British Viceroy and whose father worked in the Viceregal Lodge. Churchill's nanny used to scare him with stories about the local Fenians. Once, when he fell off his pet donkey in the grounds, he feared it was an ambush. There is an argument that the modern history of Ireland, including the 1916 Rising and later the partition with Northern Ireland, although they were both still decades in the future at that time, was dictated by the Phoenix Park murders. After all, when Parnell persuaded Gladstone to introduce the first Home Rule Bill in 1886, causing the British Liberal Party to split, the man who led the new Liberal Unionist breakaway was Lord Cavendish's unforgiving brother. By the time of the second bill in the 1890s, Parnell was dead, his party split, and the prospects of an agreed Ireland, such as they had ever been, fading. In the meantime, sensitivity about the 1882 events and their aftermath meant that they could never be commemorated in the usual ways. But from early on, there grew up a tradition of quietly marking the spot where the murders happened. This is thought to have been started by one of the first arrivals at the scene that day, who later took to cutting the shape of a cross in the grass there and leaving flowers every May 6th. That was continued by his family and later by friends. It was a fixed tradition by the 1930s when Taoiseach Eamon de Valera, who was Irish president, would later occupy the old Viceregal Lodge, knew about it. Sometime in the 1980s, it became a responsibility of the Office of Public Works, which now manages the park. But 138 years after the event, it remains surely the most discreet political memorial in Ireland. We have a phone video here, which I took the other day. It's just to give you a quick idea of where this is. That's looking back towards the city down the main road of Phoenix Park, sweeping around across the 15 acres, and then looking north towards the Phoenix Monument. The key to finding the monument always is to look for what is now called Norris. It's basically the Irish White House. That's the old Viceregal Lodge, and there's an opening in a hedge there. A lot of people mistake the monument for this milestone, which is very close to it, and we think that that's why there's a lump missing out of it. Somebody may have taken a hammer to it at one point, thinking that it was supposed to be that it was a monument to somebody he didn't disagree with. The trick, as I always tell people, to finding the cross is to walk until that opening on the Oris on the White House disappears behind this big tree. And when you're lined up with that big tree almost and the house disappears, you look down in the grass and there's the cross. I know of people, including tour guides, historians, who have gone to the spot looking for this, and they phone me sometimes from the spot, and they seem to be there, but they can't find it. Sometimes it's overgrown. It's slightly more visible than usual in that. And flowers still appear on the cross every 6th of May, but ambivalently and without comment, without written comment as to which of any particular victims are being honoured. In another tradition begun in the 1970s by the late Frank Hart, a very well-known Dublin singer and song collector, some of the old ballads are also performed there on the day. One of the more dubious tributes to the events is a verse in Monto, a scatological but popular ballad synonymous with the Dubliners, set very convincingly around the turn of the century when the Montgomery Street area, so-called Monto, of Dublin was Europe's biggest red light district. The lyrics satirize various events of the time, lacing the politics with a bit of sexual innuendo in every verse, including this one. I won't try to sing this, maybe somebody might like to do so later, you're welcome. But when Kerry told on Skin the Goat, O'Donnell caught him on the boat. He's sorry now he went to float the dirty skate. It wasn't very sensible to tell on the Invincibles. They stood up for their principles day and night. That's the sexual innuendo bit. And then the chorus goes, and they all went up to Monto, Monto, Monto. In fact, rather than being a genuine turn of the century ballad, that song was a spoof of the genre, written in 1958 by an eccentric jazz critic of the Irish Times, George Hodnett. In his own rueful words later, he lived to see his parody become the thing it was sending up. More serious reflections on the murder include a play by Frank O'Connor, first performed in 1938. And speaking of crosses, on the night of its premiere, an unidentified old woman appeared at the stage door of Dublin's Abbey Theatre and handed producers a small crucifix, which, it transpired, had been sent to one of the condemned prisoners nearly 60 years before by Lady Cavendish, the Chief Secretary's widow. The early 1880s in Ireland were a time of crossroads as well as crosses. The week of the Phoenix Park murders began with Kilmainham's so-called Kilmainham crossroads, with Parnell's Kilmainham crossroads, a metaphor for the strategic choices facing him then. As it happens, there is also an actual crossroads outside Kilmainham jail, and it was noted that on the night of his release, Parnell turned right onto the South Circular Road to avoid crowds in the city centre and to catch the last train to his home in Wicklow. Thanks to the Invincibles, a few days later, Ireland endured another sudden turn. That too was metaphorical, with effects that were farther reaching. But in the short term, it was dramatised by the murderers' getaway carriage, which took a sharp left at the Chief Secretary's lodge, pictured in the background there, now the US Ambassador's residence, heading for Chapel Izard and infamy. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That was incredibly informative. I think we learned an awful lot from that. And we'll give you a round of applause. It's always difficult to do this remotely without the audience to show their appreciation for your tremendous work in putting that together and sharing with us a bit of history and something connected to Ulysses on this day. I think JaneAnne is going to introduce the next part of our program. And thanks again, Frank, very much for joining us.
Thank you, Frank. And now we're going to have a musical interlude. We're going to switch over to Mary Maloney and her daughter, Elsa Bieger. Mary is a professor here in Minneapolis at the University of St. Thomas. She comes from a small Irish-American family, one of 6 children. And she fondly remembers her semester abroad in her college years, which she spent wandering the streets of Dublin. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks, JaneAnne. The afternoon liaison between Molly Bloom and Blazes Boylan is ostensibly for the purpose of rehearsing the music for a concert tour that includes this song. Once in the deep, dark days beyond recall, when on the earth a mist began to fall, out of a dream that rose in happy throng, low to our hearts, love sang an old sweet song, and in the dusk, where fell the firelight gleam, softly it wound itself into our dreams. Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, sad the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song. Even today, we hear the song of yore. Deep in our hearts, it dwells forevermore. Footsteps may fall and weary grow away. Still, we can hear it at the end of the day. So till the end, when that shadows fall, love will remain the sweetest song of all. Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, that the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's sweet song.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really special. Next up, we have the readings portion of the evening, starting with actor and playwright Patrick Fitzgerald. Patrick made his stage debut at the Irish Repertory Theatre's first production of The Plough and the Stars. He has appeared in The Whistle in the Dark, Playboy of the Western World, Philadelphia, Here I Come, The Chagrin twice, Seamarks twice, Hal Prince's Grandchild of Kings, for which he won the prestigious Clarence Derwent Award, and numerous other productions for the company, including his own play, of which he is most proud, and that is Gibraltar, an adaptation after James Joyce's Ulysses. It was directed by Terry Kinney and co-starred Cara Seymour, who is also with us tonight. Patrick is the current moderator of the New York James Joyce Reading Group, which has been meeting once a month at the Irish Consulate for going on 25 years now. And with Patrick will be Cara Seymour, as I said, who is later going to perform Molly for us. But I'll introduce Cara now. She began her career as an undergraduate, co-founding the award-winning Trouble in Stripes Women's Theatre Company. She appeared in the Obie-winning production of Mike Leigh's Ecstasy and Goose Pimples at the New Group, The Striker at the Public, Freedom of the City in Gibraltar at the Irish Rep, The Village Bike at MCC, and 1984 on Broadway. Cara has appeared in several movies, including American Psycho, Gangs of New York, Adaptation, and Hotel Rwanda. She's recently played Sister Harriet in Steven Soderbergh's The Nick. And as I say, Cara will perform with Patrick now and will later give us Molly Bloom's soliloquy. So Patrick and Cara, you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Janet. This is a kind of a mashup of Nighttown and Bloomsday proper, and I think it's kind of self-explanatory. So, Cara, are you there? I can't see you. Cara, I need.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, there you are. So take it away, and I'll answer.
Okay. Sinn Féin.
Ourselves.
Sinn Féin a wine.
Ourselves alone. Give every child born £5, a compound interest up to 21. Come to a tidy sum. Arthur Griffith is a square-headed fella, but he has no go in him for the mob, or gas about our lovely land. The knocks are distant day.
Go on, make a stump speech of it.
I resent violence or intolerance in any shape or form.
He has the forehead of a thinker.
A revolution must come on the due installments plan.
The prudent member.
All those wretched quarrels, erroneously supposed to be about a punctilio of honour and a flag, were very largely a question of the money question, which is at the back of everything. People never knowing when to stop. Or buccaneering Van der Deckens in their phantom ship of finance, these flying Dutchmen or lying Dutchmen, as they recline in their upholstered poop, casting dice. What? Wreck day? Machines is their cry. Labour-saving apparatuses. Surplanters, bugbears, manufactured monsters for mutual murder, hideous hobgoblins produced by a horde of capitalistic lusts upon our prostituted labour. The poor man starves while they are grassing their royal mountain stags or shooting peasants and partridges in their purblind pomps of pelf and power, but their reign is rover, forever and ever and ever. My beloved subjects, ye shall ere long enter into the golden city, which is to be the new Bloomusalem in the Nova Hibernia of the future. New worlds for old, union of all, Jew, Muslim, and Gentile, 3 acres and a cow for all children of nature, compulsory manual labour for all parks open to the public day and night. Lunacy and war must now cease. A free lay church in a free lay state.
Free fox and a free hand roast. Sham! Sham! Sham!
Mixed races and mixed marriages.
What about mixed bathing, eh? Fool! Fool!
So far as politics themselves are concerned, I am only too conscious of the casualties invariably resulting from propaganda.
Propaganda! Propaganda!
Chiefly, destruction of the fittest. I want to see everyone, all creeds and classes, having a comfortable, tidy-sized income. That's the vital issue. I call that patriotism, where you can live well, the sense is, if you work.
You work. You work.
Useless words. Things go on the same, day after day. Landlord never dies, they say. They buy the place up with gold and still have all the gold. Swindle in it somewhere. Piled up bricks, piled up in cities, worn away age after age, pyramids in sand. No one is anything. This is the very worst hour of the day. I hate this hour. Feel as if I'd been eaten and spewed. Oh, there he is, the eminent poet A.E. That might be Lizzie Twig with them, coming from the vegetarian. They say it's healthier. I tried it. Keep you on the run all day. Those literally ethereal people, they're all I wouldn't be surprised if it was that kind of food, you see, produces the like waves of the brain, the poetical. For example, one of those policemen sweating Irish stew into his shirts, you couldn't squeeze a line of poetry out of him. Don't know what poetry is even. Scene. Thank you very much, Janet, and I'm going to run away now. Bye.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Patrick, and thank you, Cara, for a wonderful performance. We're delighted now to present a special performance from Senator David Norris, the most famous Joyce scholar in Ireland, and he sent us this message, which I'm going to read. Share screen, here we go. I send my very best wishes to the Irish American Bar Association of New York from a cocooned David Norris in these very troubling times. Taking into account the appalling and unjustified death of George Floyd, it's worthwhile dipping into Ulysses to touch once more the wisdom and decency of Leopold Bloom, a first-generation Jewish Dubliner who himself suffers racial abuse. And we'll now play a recording that David Norris did for us especially.
Oh, yes, I put these on.
Ladies and gents, you are here assembled to hear why earth and heaven trembled because of the black and sinister arts of an Irish writer in foreign parts. He sent me a book 10 years ago. I read it 100 times or so, backwards and forwards, down and up through both the ends of a telescope. I printed it all to the very last word, but by the mercy of the Lord, the darkness in me mind was rent, and I seen the writer's foul intent. To show you for strictures I don't give a button, I printed the poems of Mountainy Mutton and a play he wrote, you've read it I'm sure, where they speak of bastard and bugger and hewer, and a play on the word and holy Paul and some women's legs that I can't recall, written by Moore, a genuine gent that lives on his properties 10%. I printed the mystical books in dozens. I printed the table book of cousins, though ask me your pardon, as for the prose, it'll give you a heartburn on your arse. I printed the great John Millicent Singh, who soars above in an angel's wing. In the Playboy shift that he pinched the swag from Monsel's manager's travelling bag. But I draw the line at that bloody fella that was over here dressed in Austrian yellow and spouting Italian with the air to O'Leary Curtis John Wise power and writing of Dublin dirty and dear in a manner no blackamoor printer could bear. Shite and onions, do you think I'll print the name of the Wellington Monument? Sydney Parade and Sandymount Tram, Downs as cakes and Williams as jam? It's a wonder to me, upon me soul, he forgot to mention Curly's Hole.
That was a great performance there by Senator Norris, and we really appreciate him taking the time to do that to us from his cocooned lodgings in Dublin. Next up, we have Michael Murray, who's an Irish-born and educated lawyer who in his early 20s, while studying literature at Trinity College and living on Eccles Street, Leopold Bloom's street address, the Irish immigration system threw a green card on his doorstep, and he packed his bags and came to New York. He's since spent his career in New York as a relentless advocate for indigent defendants in the Bronx Legal Aid Criminal Defense Division. And Michael will be reading an extract from Seamus Heaney's The Cure at Troy. Take it away, Michael.
Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a farther shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. Call miracles self-healing, the utter self-revealing double take of feeling. If there's fire on the mountain and lightning and storm, and a God speaks from the sky, that means someone is hearing the outcry and the birth cry of new life at its term. It means, once in a lifetime, that justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme.
Thank you very much, Michael. We're now going to have a reading from John Crowley, famed theatre and film director, most famously of the beautiful movie about Irish immigration, Brooklyn, where John now lives.
Happy Bloomsday to all of you at the Irish American Bar Association of New York. I'm going to read an excerpt from the Cyclops episode of Ulysses, where Leopold Bloom gets involved in a conversation and a slight altercation with a character called the Citizen inside in Barney Kiernan's pub. Shove us over the drink, says I. Which is which? That's mine, says Joe, as the devil said to the dead policeman. And I belong to a race too, says Bloom, that is hated and persecuted. Also now, this very moment, this very instant, Gobby burnt his fingers with the butt of his old cigar. Robbed, says he. plundered, insulted, persecuted, taking what belongs to us by right. At this very moment, says he, putting up his fist, sold by auction off in Morocco like slaves or cattle. Are you talking about the New Jerusalem? Says the citizen. I'm talking about injustice, says Bloom. Right, says John Wise. Stand up to it then with force like men. That's an almanac picture for you. Mark for a soft-nosed bullet, old lardy face standing up to the business end of a gun. Gob, he'd adorn a sweeping brush, so he would, if he only had a nurse's apron on him. And then he collapses all of a sudden, twisting around all the opposite, as limp as a wet rag. But it's no use, says he. Force, hatred, history, all that. That's not life for men and women. Insult and hatred. And everybody knows that it's the very opposite of that is life. What? Says Alf. Love, says Bloom. I mean the opposite of hatred. I must go now, says he to John Wise. Just round to the court a moment to see if Moran is there. If he comes, just say I'll be back in a second. Just a moment. Who's hindering you? And off he pops like greased lightning. And you apostle to the Gentiles, says the citizen. Universal love. Well, says John Wise, isn't that what we're told? Love your neighbours. That chap, says the citizen, beggar my neighbour is his motto. Love my he's a nice pattern of a Romeo and Juliet.
We're delighted that John was able to take the time out to share with us his reading of that wonderfully poignant part of Ulysses. Now, next up we have, of course, it wouldn't be Bloomsday if we didn't have a performance of Molly. I've already introduced Cara Seymour, who participated early with Patrick, and we're thrilled to have Cara with us tonight to share with us her Molly. So take it away, Cara.
No, that's no way for him, slapping us like that on my bottom. That ignoramus that doesn't know poetry from a cabbage. You might as well be in bed with what? With a lion. God, I'm sure he'd have something better to say for himself, an old lion would. Men again all over. They can pick and choose what they please, but we're always to be chained up. They're not going to be chaining me up. What else are we given all those desires for, I'd like to know? I can't help it if I'm still young, can I? So cold, never embracing me except sometimes when he's asleep, the wrong end of me. Not knowing, I suppose, who he has. Of course, a woman wants to be embraced 20 times a day almost, to make her look young. No matter by who, so long as to be in love or loved by somebody. And I'm always to be slouching around down in the kitchen to get his lordship his breakfast. Will I indeed? Did you ever see me running? Show them attention and they treat you like dirt. I don't care what anybody says. It'd be much better for the world to be governed by the women in it. Yes, because a woman, whatever she does, she knows where to stop. A mother, what I never had. Was he not able to make one? It wasn't my fault. We came together when I was watching the two dogs, up and her behind in the middle of the naked street. That disheartened me altogether. I suppose I oughtn't to have buried him in that little woolly jacket I knitted, crying as was, but give it to some poor child. But I knew well I'd never have another. Our first death it was too. We were never the same since. Oh, I'm not going to think myself into the glooms about that anymore. They have friends they can talk to. We've none. He came somewhere. Some woman ready to stick her knife in you. I hate that in women. No wonder they treat us the way they do. We are a dreadful lot of bitches. I suppose it's all the troubles we have makes us so snappy. I'm not like that. Well, small blame to me if I am a harum-scarum. I know I am a bit. I declare to God, I don't feel a day older than then. I'd love to have a long talk with an intelligent, well-educated person. I'd have to get a nice semi-transparent morning gown and a nice pair of red slippers like those Turks with the fez used to sell. I'll just give him one more chance. I'll get up early, go about rather gay, let him have a good eyeful out of that to make his Mickey stand for him. I'll let him know that if that's what he wanted, that his wife is fucked, yes, and damn well fucked too. 5 or 6 times hand running. I've a mind to tell him every scrap and make him do it out in front of me. Serve him right. It's all his own fault if I'm an adulteress. Oh, much about it, if that's all the harm we ever did in this vale of tears. I suppose that's what a woman is supposed to be there for, or he wouldn't have made us the way he did, so attractive to men. I'll drag open my drawers, bulge it right out in his face as large as life. He can stick his tongue 7 miles up my hole as he's there, my brown part. I know every turn in him. I'll tighten my bottom well, let out a few smutty words, smell rump, or lick my shit, or the first mad thing that comes into my head. Then I'll suggest about, yes. Oh, wait now, sonny. My turn is coming. Oh, but I was forgetting about this bloody pest of a thing. Oh, so much the better. It'll be more pointed. 1:15. What an unearthly hour. I suppose they're just getting up in China now, combing out their pigtails for the day. Shall I wear a white rose? I'd love to have the whole place swimming in roses. God of heaven, there's nothing like nature. As for them saying there's no God, I wouldn't give a snap of my 2 fingers for all their learning. Why don't they go and create something, I often ask them. Atheists. Who was the first person in the universe before there was anybody that made it at all? Who? Huh? That they don't know. Neither do I. So there you are. They might as well try and stop the sun from rising tomorrow. The sun shines for you, he said, the day we were lying among the rhododendrons on Hoth Head. The day I got him to propose to me. Yes. First I gave him the bit of seed cake out of my mouth. My God, after that long kiss, I near lost my breath. Yes, he said I was the flower of the mountain. Yes, so we are flowers all, a woman's body. Yes, that was the one true thing he said in his life, and the sun shines for you today. Yes. That's why I liked him, because I saw he understood or felt what a woman is, and I knew I could always get round him, and I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading him on till he asked me to say yes. And I wouldn't answer first, only looked out over the sea and the sky, and I was thinking of so many things he didn't know of. The Greeks, the Jews, and the Arabs, and those handsome Moors, all in white and turbans like kings, asking you to sit down in their little bit of a shop, and the old castle thousands of years old, and yes, and the night we missed the boat at Algeciras, the watchman going about serene with his lamp, and oh, that awful deep down torrent, and oh, the sea crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets and the fig trees and the Alameda gardens, yes, and Gibraltar as a girl, where I was the flower of the mountain, yes, when I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used, or shall I wear a red? Yes, and how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought as well as him, there's another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes, and then he asked me would I, yes, to say yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so I could feel my breaths all perfume, and yes, and his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said yes, I would, yes.
Thank you so much, Cara.
Thank you, Cara.
So as we said earlier, our first choice had been Pete Buttiegieg as our Bloomsday speaker. So maybe we'll manage to snag him next year, but he's got big shoes to fill from Frank. So I think we hit the jackpot regardless today. But this morning we got an emailed letter from the mayor, and I'm just gonna put that up now for you. And I'm going to read this out to you because it was such a beautiful message from him. It is an honor to have been asked to speak at this year's Bloomsday celebration. I apologize for not being able to attend, but nevertheless wanted to make sure to send my best wishes to the Irish American Bar Association of New York for hosting this event, especially in the era of the pandemic when a sense of community is needed more than ever. Because of Ulysses, James Joyce has come to be known as the great epicist of the everyday. His stunning, elaborate, brilliant, and sometimes intimidating work was fundamentally human. He concerned himself with the not at all simple journey each of us makes from morning to night. Politics and world affairs were never very far from his scope, but he took up the questions of politics through the lens that matters most, the effects of the political on each of us as we go about our lives. Today's circumstances reflect this in ways Joyce might not have imagined. The national anguish over systemic racism and police violence, the descent of a pandemic that brought society to a standstill, the landmark ruling this week that helps to secure basic equality for LGBTQ Americans. So much of what goes on around us today has to do with enormous phenomena and their immediate, concrete, sometimes violent impact on specific human beings, everywhere and every day. It strikes me that you, who work in the law, are like novelists, at least a little bit Joycean, in the sense that you spend so much time with the written word, exploring and then effectuating its concrete consequences for human affairs and individual lives. With so much change upon us, and so many changes needed from us, it is as good a time as ever to seek out new ways for words to become actions. I'm wishing you all health and safety during these difficult times and sending you
Well, I think we may have lost JaneAnne there. I think she was almost complete with reciting Mayor Pete's letter, and we're very grateful to receive it. So we've almost reached the end of our proceedings for this evening, and I want to, as president of the Irish American Bar Association, thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your evening to be with us. And you know, the Irish American Bar Association has been in existence since 1987, and we hold mostly in-person events, but we've taken a new departure this year. This has been our first virtual event, and we will have more in the pipeline, so hopefully you can join us for more events in the not too distant future. I want to especially thank our musicians and contributors this evening for firstly being with us on this auspicious day, but in particular for enriching the evening and giving us such a varied and enjoyable selection of performances and contributions. And also I want to extend a very sincere thanks to my fellow directors, Andrew Lewis, Janet Walsh, and Shelley Ann Quilty-Lake, as well as our former director, JaneAnne Murray, for their tremendous work over the last couple of weeks in crafting this evening's event. So with that, we had hoped to have a little more music from Minneapolis. So hopefully we haven't lost the connection with JaneAnne. No, I can see that she's back in business. So with that, I'm gonna hand over to Howie in Minneapolis to play us out. Thank you all once again for joining us this evening, and we look forward to having you at another online IABANY event very soon.
Thank you.